State Automobile Association is pleased to join with the Automobile Club of Southern California and the California Before in the North Coastal area of California.
California's rugged and scenic northwestern corner is the beginning of the great Pacific Northwest. Spectacular mountains and twisting rivers create a region of untamed and primitive beauty. In 1849, a member of the first expedition into the North Coastal Mountains reported, "As I gazed upon the wild and rugged country spread out before us, a feeling of dread came to me. I could hardly restrain from giving expression to feelings of doubt as to the result of the expedition." But because of that expedition and others that followed, the area was gradually opened by roads that followed the path of the river. Even today, the redwood country remains much the same as it was years ago. It is more populated, but outside the small townships and on either side of the modern highways that serve the area, the course of nature is the law that governs much of the land, and the forests and waters. Wintry storms that sweep in from the Pacific and dump heavy rains on California's northwest sector create a forest condition that has spawned great stands of fir and redwood timber. It was the presence of timber in vast quantities that spurred the development of California's important lumber industry and opened the area. Lumber accounts for as much as 70% of the economy of some Northwest counties, and the world's only source of redwood is found here. The combination of forests, rivers, and streams, and an abundance of wildlife make the area one of the world's most beautiful natural preserves. The primal forests of Northern California, linked by a system of modern highways and freeways, attract millions of tourists and vacationers from all over the United States and abroad. The same combination of ocean air and mountainous terrain that has produced the redwood and fir has also created the crooked, winding rivers named Eel, Klamath, Mad, Trinity, Smith, and Van Dusen. The near-constant veil of Pacific fog that hangs wet and heavy in the river canyons and the long, humid season of rain that soaks the valleys make Northwest California phenomenally fertile. Soft, green valleys make ideal grazing lands that rarely suffer from drought. But the abundance of rain and the constant threat of excessive rain, saturated slopes, and inadequate flood control facilities leave the coastal regions almost defenseless against quick and widespread flooding. In December of 1964, just at Christmas time, a continuous rainfall saturated the Coast Range and the Klamath Mountains. A similar rain condition had created record floods in 1955, and it was assumed by many that the 55 flood level represented the maximum danger from the Mad, the Klamath, the Smith, Eel, Trinity, and Van Dusen. But on December 19, 1964, just 6 days before Christmas, Californians heard this startling pronouncement from Governor Edmund G. Brown.
I've been informed by the United States Weather Bureau that weather conditions developing over Northern California mean continuing heavy rains. All streams in the northern part of the state are rising. Predictions are for a continuation of that trend, with flood stages...
On the morning of December 20th, an observer reported the Eel River is only a little over 4 feet below the 1955 flood and appears to be rising a foot an hour at this time. By 6 o'clock on the evening of December 20th, it became evident that all rivers north of the Eel would rise above original estimates based on river gauges. But many of the gauges were lost in the torrents of mud and debris that were sliding into the charging rivers. As residents began to evacuate threatened lowlands, an editorial in the Humboldt Standard said, "No greater force for destruction ever was assembled in Humboldt County in remembered or written history." And then California became headline news from coast to coast.
Floodwaters continue spreading over southern Oregon and northern California, with many areas isolated from land transportation. Northern California rivers, swollen with record amounts of rain, are pouring across access routes, destroying bridges and inundating entire communities. Flood stages in most areas have already passed the 1955 flood level, and further disaster is threatened by the still rising waters. The city of Eureka and all of Humboldt County are completely cut off from highway travel in all directions. From those areas where communications have not been lost, come reports of serious damage to bridges and highways. The few flood control facilities in the northern river system have been unable to contain the fast-rising waters, and up to 20 feet of current is flowing through spillways. Released waters joining the swift, powerful currents of angry rivers add greater velocity and destructive force to downstream currents. Collecting lumber and debris, the fast-moving waters batter a steel and concrete bridge over the American River near Auburn in the Sierra foothills. A large storage tank becomes a water-borne missile aimed at the low-lying bridge. In an extremely rare incident, cameramen from television station KCRA in Sacramento filmed the destruction of a bridge resulting from the collapse of an unfinished dam. As the river rises and gains velocity, tons of debris are slammed against the bridge, and the crack between bridge and highway widens. Constantly rising, swift currents repeatedly ram the weakening structure, and the bridge begins to tremble. One last powerful assault, and another obstacle to the rampaging waters is eliminated. A bridge that had taken many months to construct is lost in a matter of minutes. At Alton, where the Eel and Van Dusen rivers join, two young men abandon their car to the rising currents, and spectators watch helplessly as an abandoned dog floats downstream to certain death. Those who have not been trapped by the sea of floodwaters are evacuating by any means available. Over 5,000 persons in Oregon and California have fled their homes, and many more are threatened. It is not known whether lives have been lost, but some officials have expressed deep concern. In Humboldt County, apparently suffering the greatest damage from the record floods, 8 towns have been ordered to evacuate. Many towns are already partially underwater, and damage to farm and dairy lands is reported to be severe. The 4 counties of Del Norte, Shasta, Humboldt, and Mendocino have already been declared disaster areas by Governor Brown. Units of the National Guard and the Army Corps of Engineers have moved evacuees to 4 emergency centers set up in Humboldt County. Helicopter observers in the rich farm and dairy lands around the Eel River report that large herds of cattle and sheep are exposed to grave danger, and many acres of California's finest grazing land are underwater. The Federal Aviation Agency, operating out of the Eureka Arcata Control Tower, is coordinating a massive airlift involving planes and helicopters from all branches of the service. Food and clothing by the ton are moving into emergency relief centers located in Eureka. The American Red Cross and the Salvation Army are distributing relief commodities throughout the flood-stricken area. 8 Army helicopters, the first operational aircraft on the scene, have begun emergency flights of rescue and relief. 10 minutes after reaching Ronerville Airfield, the craft were airborne on a series of emergency missions. Flying under the most adverse weather conditions, Army pilots are fighting their way through snow, rain, and fog to reach isolated families. With communications gone, the choppers are making reconnaissance flights over the disaster area. In addition to food and clothing, 4 doctors have joined the airlift to assess medical needs. To reach most of these flood-isolated areas, Army pilots, who are being joined by Navy, Marine, Coast Guard, and Air Force units, have flown through fog-covered canyons and rain-soaked air. Racing up from the naval base at Long Beach is the aircraft carrier Bennington. Planes loaded with supplies of medicine, blankets, and food are launched at sea, and plans are to base the huge carrier off Humboldt Bar, where it will be used as a service and medical center. To those who have evacuated homes, now floating down the flooded and still rising rivers, rescue from the air could be the only means of survival. But for an estimated several thousand head of cattle, there will be no survival. A little reported factor in the northern flood situation is the unusually high tides that prevent normal drainage of the flooded rivers. The high tides followed a full moon in a near exact line with the sun and earth, a situation which a few days ago...
In Sacramento, the State Division of Highways was making an effort to assess damages and coordinate emergency repair. With telephone lines down, highways washed out, bridges smashed, and rails demolished, communications were all but impossible. And yet the survival of the area would depend on reopening highway transportation.
Emergency traffic Rio Dell to Fortuna. Open Fortuna to south of Warren.
Because there was no other way, the Division of Highways was dependent on reports by radio telephone from division engineers who hiked in over mountains through rain and mud to relay information on highway and bridge conditions.
I'm afraid we lost another one. The whole midsection of this bridge is gone. It looks like about 150 feet.
Even in areas far removed from swollen river currents, the heavy rains had caused massive earth slides. Because rail service to the stricken area had been knocked out, the reopening of highway routes was a priority objective. But as the extent of damages became known, it was evident that a complete rebuilding of the highway system would be a matter of several years. California had suffered its greatest highway disaster. Emergency crews were quickly dispatched to washed-out bridge and highway sites and remained there until temporary structures had been completed. The Bailey Bridge, a creation of the emergencies of war, became a lifeline to communities made inaccessible by the raging waters. The need for highways was never more pointedly demonstrated. Restoration of highway facilities was begun on a crash basis as soon as the waters subsided. Every highway in the flood area suffered major damages. Where roads followed the riverbed, the torrential flows cut away the base of canyon slopes, brought slides of mud cascading into the rivers, taking the road with it. Logs and debris that had battered scores of bridges into submission were washed out to sea, to return with the tide. The loss of lumber and the cost of reclaiming lumber and logs would cost many millions of dollars. And that which could not be reclaimed had to be piled up and burned. To be sure that severely damaged roads could accommodate essential traffic, a convoy system was established by the California Highway Patrol.
Looks like we've got about 150 feet.
The convoy, while allowing badly needed food, fuel, and medicines to get through, also permitted construction work to proceed between convoy hours. On US 101 below Garberville, escorted convoys formed during the day and traveled through the night to give construction crews a maximum number of daylight working hours. When the rain had finally stopped and the sun burned through the heavy layers of fog, it revealed a sea of mud and silt where farms and villages had been. Much of the damage could be measured in terms of money, in terms of rebuilding time. But much of it could not be measured for it involved great personal loss. In all, some 30 lives were lost during the Christmas floods of 1964. Hundreds of houses were destroyed, and a few towns completely wiped out. A helicopter observer at the height of the flood in Pepperwood reported, "Pepperwood is completely gone. It's just a huge pile of debris. Houses are stacked on top of houses. The entire area is floating. Nothing is standing. Nothing but debris." When the Eel River reached its peak in Pepperwood, the downtown area was under 35 feet of water. Five died in Pepperwood. The survivor said, "I came here in the 30s and helped put Pepperwood on the map, but I'm not going to do it again." It was just 3 days before Christmas Eve when Phillipsville was ordered to evacuate. And when residents returned, they found their houses gone or demolished. In the rich bottomlands of Ferndale, the entire county road system was destroyed. Homes were lost, and hundreds of head of cattle perished. In the town of Wiyot by the Eel River, at least 54 buildings were destroyed by 35 feet of floodwaters that raced down the main street. The town of Klamath, a world-famous salmon and steelhead fishing community, is gone. The mighty force of the swollen Klamath River swept through the summer home community of Klamath Glen, flattening everything in its path. 400 feet of Klamath's Douglas Memorial Bridge, a vital link of Highway 101 that could not be detoured, were destroyed. Near State Route 96, Bluff Creek left its bed, found new strength in its great volume of water, and smashed a gaping hole through the highway. Among the 18 state bridges lost to the record floods of 1964 was the beautiful, award-winning suspension bridge at Orleans on the Klamath. It was called Little Golden Gate. The Orleans community is split by the Klamath, and when the bridge collapsed, the only link to limited supplies was by motorboat. Almost every kind of bridge ever designed was smashed by the irresistible force of high water and debris. Through truss, deck truss, simple girder, suspension, pile causeway, and concrete arch bridges, all were destroyed. No design could withstand the powerful force. Altogether, 7 bridges were lost on the Redwood Highway. All were important. South of Scotia on the Eel River, the old bridge outlived the new. The 4-year-old Richard Fleischer span was swept cleanly away. Near Dyerville at the South Fork of the Eel, the old bridge gave way and the new one held. In addition to the 18 state bridges destroyed, 104 county bridges yielded to the most destructive floods ever recorded in California. The bridge pier at Martin's Ferry rises 95 feet above normal water line, but flood debris was left on its top. The Klamath's crest in the narrow gorge is estimated to have reached 115 feet. canyon walls along the banks of the Eel, the Klamath, the Smith, the Trinity, and Van Dusen are often high and steep. And when the base of the slope had been washed out, there was no place to go but down the river. And when the banks went, the roads disappeared in the swirling waters. Slides and slip-outs removed whole sections of road over the entire north coastal area. Transportation problems for the stricken area were further compounded by severe damage to some 100 miles of northwestern Pacific rail lines. Between 20 and 30 miles of rails were washed down the Eel River. The remainder of the area's only rail line, considered an engineering masterpiece when constructed, was wrecked and out of service for an estimated 6 months. The great logging industry, essential to the dynamic growth of the entire state, would now depend on quickly restored highways to move their products to market. As soon as the State Division of Highways had made a thorough assessment of damages to the highway system, a report was made to Governor Edmund G. Brown and Senator Randolph Collier.
Damaged highways back so that service can be given to the traveling public. As you know, Governor, from your trip to the area last week,
Senator Collier, chairman of the Senate Transportation Committee, was joined at the governor's briefing by heads of government agencies involved in rebuilding and emergency repair.
To this map in front of me, I would like to point out that each one of those numbers represents a major bridge that has been damaged or completely demolished. Each one of the heavy black lines is a state highway where the service has been stopped because of either a damaged bridge or a washout or a slip-out or a slide.
When do you think you'll be able to open that area up again and get those roads in repair?
Well, Governor, the roads are under repair now. The matter of the date of opening depends an awful lot on the weather that we have for the next several weeks. In this area on 101, between Cummings and Leggett, this is the important part of opening to the south from Eureka. We hope that within 2 to 3 weeks we'll be able to get emergency traffic through under a controlled convoy type of movement.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Gillis. I assure you that as governor of this state, I'll do everything just as fast as possible to see that that entire area is opened up again. And I know that you're going to get help from the legislature of the state of California. We want that area opened up just as soon as we possibly can.
Earlier in 1964, the North Coastal counties had proudly dedicated new freeways and new bridges. Business, industry, and residents had foreseen an easing of their relative isolation. But before year's end, many of the older stretches of highway lay in ruin, and scores of bridges gone. There was nothing to do but commence rebuilding. And the first and most vital step would be to reopen the highway system. Temporary repairs had allowed the necessities of food, clothing, and medicine to reach flood victims. And now the job of rebuilding was underway. The restoration of highway lifelines would be a matter of survival for the Redwood country. Rebuilt highways would activate economic forces and open the area's great scenic attractions to vacationers from all over California and the United States. The bridge at Robinson's Ferry was expected to open by May 1st. The North Scotia Bridge at Rio Dell was temporarily spanned, but permanent rebuilding would allow nearly 3 million crossings before the year was out. Over hundreds of miles of washed-out roadway, reconstruction was the order of the day. The sounds of rebuilding were heard at Klamath Glen and echoed throughout the deep river canyons of the Redwood country. It may take years to completely rebuild all bridges and highways, but the work was begun. And highway engineers promised that the area would be ready for the 1965 vacation season, expected to top the 5 million tourists of 1964. It would be a long and tough fight. But this land of poetic beauty and extraordinary fertility will survive the great Christmas floods of 1964. For in the devastation, there remained confidence. A confidence based on man's ability to survive and build for the future.